Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to Aish New York's program for Lag BaOmer. I am extremely excited to be sitting with two great individuals. I've had the pleasure of working with them on a number of different musical and spiritual programs. This is no exception. We have a great program lined up for you tonight. And just to get things started, you may or may not have heard of the Jewish holiday of Lag BaOmer. It's one of the lesser known holidays that we have. And if I had to summarize what is ultimately a big topic in a very short period of time, I would describe it like this. There is a 50-day period of time between the second day of Passover and a holiday known as Shavuot, where our job is essentially to count. And we count towards the holiday of Shavuot, and each day we're evaluating a new Kabbalistic idea and trying to develop ourselves as people. And there's this interesting transition that takes place on the 33rd day of that count. Lag means 33, BaOmer means of the Omer count. And this 33rd day is considered an especially mystical, auspicious time. It celebrates or commemorates the death of a rabbi named Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in Israel about 2,000 years ago. And he is the author of a famous Kabbalistic work known as the Zohar. And the Zohar came into the world at that time, and we celebrated therefore with reflection. The Zohar means the splendorous or the light. And people, especially in Israel, but around the world, celebrate this with bonfires and barbecues, and people have the habit of going up to Rabbi Bar Yochai's grave up in Meron, Israel. And that's one thing. The second interesting thing, and I'm going to tie this into the current time period, is this is the time, the 33rd day of the Omer counts, when Rabbi Shimon's teacher, whose name was Rabbi Akiva, he had 24,000 students who sadly died in a plague at that time about 2,000 years ago. So I always wondered, gosh, how could 24,000 people die in a plague? Like, it just seemed like an impossibility. And unfortunately now it seems so obvious. And so I see exactly how that could happen. And the reason, according to the Talmud, and this is why it's relevant, the reason that they died in that plague is because they did not show honor to each other. And interestingly enough, the word for honor in the Hebrew language is kaved, honor. They did not show honor to each other, kaved, and therefore they died in a plague. So it's with that, let's hope that we've reached this time in our own plague, this transition point, that our plague will also start winding down, and that we will release the light of goodness and Rabbi Shimon's teaching from the Zohar into the world, and God willing, things will start to get much, much better. Okay, so it's my honor to be working, I said, with these two guys. I'm going to tell you, just by way of brief introduction, the man who's in my screen, he's on my left, is named Jamie Saft. Jamie and I met, although he doesn't remember, 30 years ago at a small club in Somerville, Massachusetts, where my teacher took me. I was studying piano at the time, and my teacher took me to hear this young guy who apparently was really good, really great jazz musician. And I walk in, and the first thing that I notice is that he's playing a Joni Mitchell song. And that was, that was remarkable to me, not just because we're doing Joni Mitchell tonight, but because I love Joni, and I didn't know at the time that you could turn her into jazz. And so we are in for such a treat tonight. We're going to hear 3 tunes from Jamie, all Joni Mitchell tunes played in his amazing style. I was lucky enough to reunite with him a number of years back. We worked on a project called Kabbalah Me, great film you should go out and see. And it is an honor to have you here with us again tonight, Jamie. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And my friend Andrew Ganger is an incredible talent manager. And not only that, he knows every single thing there is to know about music. He is an inexhaustible font of knowledge. We have been talking for more than a decade about music. I don't think we have actually any other conversation. It's just this ongoing, delightful conversation that we've been having. I've learned an incredible amount from him, and so can you. And we're going to launch things off with him right this second. We're going to hear about the history of the greats, Joni Mitchell.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobs. It's always such an honor and a pleasure to get to discuss music with you and Jamie. And it's when tonight's a real treat. Joni Mitchell is one of my very, very favorite musicians in the world. And she's also one of the most influential of all the artists really to come from that folk tradition of the 1960s. I would probably say her and Bob Dylan have really created the music that really continues to inspire us, shock us, educate us, mesmerize us, and so forth and so on. And you know, artists as diverse as Prince, Herbie Hancock, Taylor Swift, even Maynard James Keenan from the band Tool, all of them claim Joni as prime influence on their work and their view of the world. So, you know, as we typically do at these kinds of events, I don't want to take up too much time on a biography, and I don't want to take away from the extraordinary music James is going to perform. I will say, though, if anyone's looking for a more in-depth bio, I highly recommend the book Reckless Daughter, A Portrait of Joni Mitchell by David Yaffe. I don't get any royalties on it, but it's a great book, and I think you'll learn a lot more. Let's just take a quick little cliff notes on her life for some of you who may not be as familiar with Joni and her extraordinary work. She was born Roberta Joan Anderson in Alberta, Canada in 1943, and she showed an interest in the arts and painting from a very, very young age. Her paintings, incidentally, would later serve her well during her career because she would frequently use her extraordinary works of art as the album covers for her records. It's funny, on her childhood, Herbie Hancock, of all people, has a great quote about young Joni, and I think it serves as a fine introduction to her vocal style, which so many people try to emulate. Herbie says, Joni Mitchell heard Billie Holiday sing Solitude when she was about 9 years old, and she has not been the same since. The way she phrases always serves the lyrics perfectly, and yet her phrasing can be different every time. She is truly a fighter for freedom. So, as Joni was growing up, she had lessons in classical piano and also learned how to play guitar from a Pete Seeger songbook. And due to an earlier bout with polio, her left hand was weakened, which led to a variety of alternate tunings which she developed and helped later to create songs that don't sound like anybody else. Bob Dylan once remarked about Joni's playing, Joni's got a strange sense of rhythm that's all her own. Above all, Mitchell won't be boxed in. So although art was still her great passion, Joni continued to hone her musical craft and eventually married Chuck Mitchell, adopted his surname, and moved to New York City. She would play the entire coffeehouse circuit up and down the East Coast as they had in those days, all while writing the first batch of songs that would eventually make her famous. At first, these songs actually became hits when covered by other artists and include such standards of hers, such as Chelsea Morning, Circle Game, Both Sides Now, the list goes on and on. Taking up with David Crosby as the producer and her boyfriend, she released her debut record, Songs to a Seagull, in 1968. While not an immediate smash, it did continue to impress critics and her fellow musicians and led to further albums of increasing complexity, both musically and lyrically. Albums from this era, such as Clouds and Ladies of the Canyon, led to her first real success at radio, especially with the song Big Yellow Taxi and its iconic refrain, They Paved Paradise and Put Up a Parking Lot. And of course, the song Woodstock, which we'll be discussing more shortly. This period of time marks the peak of what most consider to be Joni's masterpiece and one of the finest albums ever made, 1971's Blue. It's a mature and jazzy work of deep personal intensity, and it continues to resonate with people today. NPR recently actually just considered it the #1 greatest album ever made by a woman. And Rolling Stone declared it the 30th greatest album of all time. Joni herself says about the album Blue, at that period of my life, I had no personal defenses. I felt like a cellophane wrapper on a pack of cigarettes. I felt like I had absolutely no secrets from the world, and I couldn't pretend in my life to be strong. This early to mid-70s period would end up serving as Joni's commercial and critical peak, especially with 1974's Court and Spark album, which went double platinum and hit #1 in Canada and #2 here in America. After that, she went on an extensive and successful tour to support the record and released a very well-received live album entitled Miles of Isles. But it was her next studio album which really represents the biggest shift in sound and style. 1975, she releases The Hissing of Summer Lawns, and this is a dramatic jump from the folk style that previously defined her work. Now she's working far more in the jazz idiom, incorporating world music and a world-weary attitude. She'd continue in this direction for much of the 1970s, working with legends such as Charlie Mingus, Wayne Shorter, Jaco Pastorius, and so many other great artists. And throughout the 80s and 90s, Joni would put out albums that flirted with pop accessibility while maintaining the jazz heart of her work. Frequently, there would even be experiments with drum machines, synthesizers, and all sorts of electronic instruments, alongside collaborations with high-profile artists such as Billy Idol, Tom Petty, and Peter Gabriel. Unfortunately, none of this really led to much commercial success, and by now, Joni had pretty much retired from large-scale touring. It was also during the late 90s that her voice really began to change dramatically, although Joni denied that it was caused by her tremendous addiction to cigarettes that began when she was only 9 years old. As the 21st century began, Joni released a couple albums of material that were widely well received, but she also began to be increasingly bitter about her treatment in the music business and the perceived lack of success and respect that she felt she had earned. This, on top of bad health issues, some physical, some mental and emotional, have unfortunately slowed down and possibly even silenced one of the greatest artists of our time. I personally take heart and solace in reports that show that Joni is now starting to truly recover from the stroke she suffered in 2015 and getting better each and every day. She's truly one of the most unique and original talents in music, and there's simply no words that can adequately express her greatness. As the late departed Prince once declared about his hero, I love all of Joni's music. Joni's music should be taught in school. Thank you, Rabbi.
Excellent. So now we're going to get into the music and we're going to pick out 3 songs. The first one is called Woodstock. And Jamie, if you had to just reflect on this for a second before you play it, what are your thoughts on this tune?
You know, it's one of the greatest compositions in rock and roll. Obviously, wasn't Joni's hit in the first place. It was made famous by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. But to me, Joni's version is definitive. And Joni always, to me, really gets to the sort of the mystical aspect of the music directly. Woodstock was about a sort of mythic moment that she didn't actually experience. Joni
Right.
was kept back from attending Woodstock, and CSN flew in, and Joni was stuck in New York because she had, I think, a television appearance the next day, and they didn't want to lose her up in Woodstock. And so she wrote that tune in New York, imagining what the experience of Woodstock was. So it's a very amazing picture of that moment.
Yeah, well, she seemed to capture it better than anybody else, wouldn't you say?
Right.
For someone especially who wasn't there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's also sort of a dark feeling song, wouldn't you say, for an experience that was so positive for so many people?
Yes, and her version specifically has a much darker tone. I feel like the CSN version was much more up and optimistic, but her
Energetic.
is very down and very sort of contemplative and
Okay,
very,
so either one of you guys, why is that? You know, everybody regards Woodstock as this, like, you know, this landmark event of happiness and joy and love, and her opening chords on the song sound like she's almost sort of sad to me. What's that?
Well, I think if I may jump in, there's a great quote from Joni that I wrote down here that she talks a little bit about this. She says, when I saw the magazine articles and the pictures of Woodstock and everything, I really felt very sorry for myself because it'll never happen again, of course. They'll try and, this is the key part, they'll try and recapture it, you know, and it'll just get worse and worse. And worse. Well, maybe that's just a pessimistic way to look at it, but I don't know. It was really something that people could be so good to each other, even if it was only for 3 days, all those people being good to each other for 3 whole days. So I think there's a sadness tinged with the fact that she didn't make it there. But I think there's also a sadness, this is just now my theorizing, but I think there's also a sadness that comes from knowing that after Woodstock, then what? It's sort of like, where do you go from here? And there's a
Right.
sad attached to that.
Okay, well, just to throw out one Kabbalistic idea to you guys, there's this idea that there's 2 chambers of the heart. Obviously, there's more than 2 chambers. You know, there's 4. Okay, metaphorically, there's 2 chambers. One of them is called bechia, which means crying, and the other one's called chedva, which means joy. And it seems to me, and this is totally subjective, but the very best music has both. It hits both places. For me, where there's a great joy to it, and also there's some underlying sadness at the same time. And I personally find that Joni's music does that so fantastically. And you know, I can think of so many tunes that are like this, but the thing that really got me, the song that got me with her was called Tin Angel off the Clouds album. And that song, it's about falling in love, new love, right? What could be happier than that? But the song is so dark. It's so in this minor key, these dark overtones, and yet it's a love song, you know. And I think there's just something really, really unusual about the way that she does that and how effective and powerful it ends up being. You know, she has some light songs also, for sure, you know, but when she goes down that middle path, to me, it's like you can't replicate it. Nobody else does it that I know of. You agree? Disagree?
Yeah, that's a magical ability that Joni has. You know, Joni, people talk about Joni's music as being melancholy, and she always says she hates that term and doesn't like it applied to her music. So I think the way that you were looking at it maybe gets at that sort of same idea, that there's positivity and, you know, conflict in both, you know, can exist at the same time in a piece of music. And
Totally.
certainly Joni captured that idea about the moment that was Woodstock.
Right. So let me just read you one quote and talk about that for a minute, and then Jamie, you'll take it away. But you know, it occurs to me that it's very grandiose, her take on what Woodstock was. She compares it literally to the Garden of Eden, essentially. And she says, I came upon a child of God. He was walking along the road, and I asked him, where are you going? And this he told me, I'm going down to Yasker's farm. I'm going to join in a rock and roll band. I'm going to camp out on the land, and I'm going to try to what? Get my soul free. That's pretty big, you know, with these children of God. And then she goes on to say, we are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. I love the grandiosity of those words. And to me, the illusion is exactly correct. You know, the relationship between going somewhere to the garden itself, you know, and having Woodstock represent this little microcosm of, you know, 3 days where people really got along in this sea of turmoil is a very beautiful idea. So we don't have all the words to give you right now. If you want to follow along and look it up online or whatever, this is Woodstock, Joni Mitchell's Woodstock, performed by the great Jamie Saft. Awesome. So just one more thought on Woodstock before we move on. And I was thinking, what's the opposite of Woodstock? What's the opposite of the garden? And if the garden represents the ultimate extreme utopian goodness, which I think it does, what's the opposite, like Nazism, for instance? And so I happened to come across something interesting. You know what the swastika means? It's a Sanskrit word, because the Nazis took it from an ancient Indian symbol. And it refers to the sun, and it refers to the cycle of the sun going round and round. And there are some positive connotations to it, but there's also some negative ones, like an endless cycle that you can't escape from, right? Interestingly, and I read into this a little bit, but the Nazis' ideology was anti-technology and anti-progress. They didn't believe that the world should progress, that there was no place to go to or to improve towards. It was just this brutal cycle of survival. And therefore the swastika represents this going round and round and round of the sun without end. And the opposite of what Judaism believes, which is there's a beautiful utopian direction to go in, that we break free of the cycle and end up in a place that's extremely good. And that was a revolutionary idea when it came into the world, thousands of years ago. So now song number 2, Andrew, the song Same Situation. What do you think? What did that do for you?
I love it. It makes me think about, is there anyone on the planet who can better articulate the complexity of love and human relationships than Joni Mitchell? I mean, this song obviously is, we were talking about beforehand, Court and Spark, which is really the first album that got me into Joni Mitchell's music as a kid. God, this is a fantastic song. It's lyrics like this one that I think really endeared Joni to kind of multiple generations of female fans in particular, who really saw their own struggles, I think, mirrored and articulated through the music, and in a way that they may not have done from, let's say, Led Zeppelin or other artists. Yeah, Cream, right, or other artists of the time. Obviously, there's no monopoly of gender in terms of loving Joni Mitchell. We, obviously all love her music, but I think in particular she hit upon the female sort of psyche in this song. There's a quote she says here about it, if you don't mind. I think it's interesting about this song. She says, "I don't want to name names or kiss and tell, but the same situation is a portrait of a Hollywood bachelor and the parade of women through his life and how he toys if he had another one. So many women have been in this position, being vulnerable at a time when you need affection, or searching for love and you fall into the company of a Don Juan."
Would you say that Coyote is about that also?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a number of the songs in her catalog neatly fit that. I mean, obviously from a spiritual perspective, this song I think is so beautiful because of I love that she adds in the word still. So it's like, still I send up my prayer, wondering who is there to hear. I just love that even in the time of doubt, she still prays and hopes and wonders and struggles. I just as a fan, I appreciate that. I appreciate that she's open-minded. I appreciate that, she's trying to get to someplace.
Yeah, nice. Jamie, you have anything to add to that?
Not specifically. You got it.
Okay, you're gonna play it in a second.
I would be happy to.
Okay, I just want to read the one line before you do it, which is Andrew quoted part of it. She says, and by the way, we'll hear from Joni herself, not her. No, she's not going to call in, but we'll hear her voice before we're done. But the lyrics, again, look them up if you want to. It's called Same Situation. She says, "Still, I send up my prayer, wondering where it had to go, with heaven full of astronauts and the Lord on death row. While the millions of his lost and lonely ones call out and clamor to be found, caught in their struggle for higher positions and their search for love that sticks around." So we'll talk about that more in a couple of minutes. But for now, let's hear Same Situation. Take it away, Jamie. Beautiful. Jamie,
Yes, sir.
as a piano player, what's that like to play her stuff? The progressions, it sounds very jazzy.
You chose 3 Joni piano tunes. All 3 tunes you chose are Joni piano tunes. And in her earlier career, they were sort of equal, or there were plenty of piano tunes, and then that started to fade away. But Joni, in the same way that Andrew described her unique guitar tunings, she also has these wild piano voicings that are just really unique and specific to Joni's music. And it's one of the reasons I think later she gravitated towards working with jazz musicians, people like Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock and Jocko, who really understood these sort of complex chords. So a Joni song can sound very easy and effortless because of the way that she delivers, but the piano tunes are really complicated. In a strange way, the guitar tunes are less complicated, even though the tunings are really varied. Joni has something like 60 different guitar tunings over the course of her music. And when she played live, she would struggle to have to retune the guitar. So she would sort of group her tunes together based on the ones that had the same guitar tunings. And we're talking about really different guitar tunings from standard guitar tunings. She would sort of base her guitar tunings off of, she says she goes outside and she tunes to the sound of the birds. And so that's how she described it. But her guitar tunings are really complex, sort of starting with a low C. That could be her tuning for, in fact, that is the tuning for Hajira. It sounds like, you can hear it, and it has that sort of
Sounds like a jazz chord.
Major third and the sort of the fourth. So it's got that movement and that sort of longing, and that it's not at rest. It's moving. And so trying to figure out a Joni piano tune as well can be really complicated, even though they're not hard chords, but they cross over and they do strange things, and it's, you know, part of the magic of Joni.
So both of you guys, would you say that obviously she's got an incredible voice, which we haven't even fully gotten into. Is she a top shelf musician?
Absolutely, absolutely. She's a master musician, both of the piano and the guitar, but also her command of her voice as an instrument is absolutely at the level of the greatest vocalists. And you hear it in the way she hones in on certain pitches, just effortless control of her pitch. And one of the things we were speaking about earlier today when we were sound checking was, you know, since Joni has been ill over the last number of years, her voice has deteriorated somewhat, though I love late period Joni and think, you know, she very much still has that same control over her voice. But it reached a point when I think she didn't feel she had the control over her voice. And that's one of the reasons that she doesn't really sing in public anymore. But if you listen to the orchestral records that she did in the 2000s, she's still absolutely a master of her control of pitch, of phrasing. I mean, her phrasing is unreal, very highest level of phrasing. And obviously she's one of the, she's unique in that she writes all her own music. No one wrote music for Joni, you know, and so she was able to sort of connect her harmonic concept, her musical ideas and the different instruments she played, her lyrical content, the tone color of the melodies, of the chords, of the entire sort of universe that she would create with each song. A
Right.
true master.
It seems to me that combining that level of musicianship with the lyricism that she has is extremely unique.
Yeah, it's very rarefied, very rarefied.
Okay, so to just one idea, Andrew, you're free to jump in anytime you want also, but I quoted what she said before in this tune, Same Situation, where she describes God having millions of lost and lonely ones. And who what do they want? They want to be found. Which, what does that mean? Like a lot of her lyrics, like she's struggling to be found herself. She wants to be understood and she wants to be acknowledged, it seems to me. Like, you know, all of her relationship struggles, like, you know, like everybody, she's looking to be understood. And I think that that's one of the primary drives that humanity has, is for people to understand them. I think that's actually part of the reason people project themselves through music or art in general, is an attempt to make a deeper part of themselves known to the world. And one that can't necessarily be expressed through words, but it's remarkable to me, again, that she can do both through the music and through the lyrics. But she says, she tells you the answer, like what is holding people back from being found? They're caught in their struggle for higher positions, which means ego, right? And these challenging relationships. Like that's what is holding people back from being found, it seems to me that she's getting at. And it's just a beautiful idea, you know, and I love the fact that we said earlier that she sends up her prayer despite everything, and just shoots it out into space and hopes that it goes to the right place. There's something very authentically spiritual about that, I think, you know, not knowing exactly what it means, but giving it a shot anyway. You know, that's what my thought on the song. Anything to add on that, Andrew, before we move on?
No, I agree with you 100%. I think that's something that Joni shares a lot with Leonard Cohen. I get that, you know, I know they were obviously, they dated for a while, they were close friends, but I think Leonard does that extraordinarily well also, which is show, as we spoke about, not just, you know, a lot of times in music from the artists of the 60s and 70s in particular, and even now, everyone's always like, oh, you know, they have the answer or they know the answer. And I tend to gravitate towards artists like Joni and like maybe Van Morrison and certainly Leonard Cohen that tell you they don't know the answer, but they're trying. They're, you know, they're part of this sort of this ongoing dialogue and conversation with the spiritual. And there's not necessarily a resolution. I don't think, you know, maybe, I don't know, maybe Jamie, you think differently, but I'd be interested to know if there's any Joni song where there's like a final resolution in terms of her finding exactly what she's looking for. I think it always kind of, I mean, I have to think about it. I have to go through her whole catalog, but I think overall she's always on the search, always on the hunt, always, I just love that about her music in general.
Beautiful. So Andrew, give us the setup for Real Good for Free. What's that about?
There's actually a very interesting story and history on this one, because it was originally released in 1970 on Ladies of the Canyon, and it was entitled For Free. But for me, actually, the definitive version is a live recording from 1974 on the album Miles of Isles, where in that time it was entitled Real Good for Free. Same song. Either way, this is truly one of her masterpieces, and it hits upon themes that to be honest, Rabbi, are very near and dear to me. You know, I'm someone that's worked in the music business my entire life, you know, and I'm always faced every single day with walking that tightrope between art and capitalism. You know, where does one begin? Where does one end? You know, do we create because it is in our blood and we must release what's inside of us? Or is this just simply a way to, you know, to get rich and live the high lifestyle of a cliched rock star? I mean, Joni's not immune to those questions. And I think this song does a great job at articulating that struggle. I'm reminded, it's funny, you know, she talks about how Joni, talking about the song, she said she was in New York and there's a sidewalk musician playing the clarinet on the corner of 6th and 8th, and she says he was playing real good for free, and that's why she called it, this song. But it's funny. I was reminded there's a very famous experiment you might be familiar with from a few years back with the extraordinary classical musician, the violinist Joshua Bell. Do you know about this? Right. So for people that don't know, basically there's this very famous classical musician, Joshua Bell. They disguised him and had him play his Stradivarius, millions of dollars, right, as a busker in the Washington, D.C. metro. And they watched and they did an experiment. They videotaped it. And during the 45 minutes he played, over 1,000 people walked by the performance, and only 7 people stopped to listen to him play. And from that, only 1 person recognized him. So, once again, the question remains, what qualities make music memorable, important, riveting, worthwhile? Is it the scene and the setting? Is it the lyrics or the quality of the playing? Is it the media telling us what we should enjoy and listen to? Who determines what's important, what's vital? In this song, Joni hits on that theme. He says he was playing real good for free. Nobody stopped to hear him, though he played so sweet and high. They knew he had never been on their TV, so they passed his music by.
Yeah, that is an interesting phenomena and a good question. And before we get into it a little more, I'm going to try to share my screen with everybody, and let's hear a 1983 version that Jamie sent me. Just like a minute of it, and then we'll get into Jamie doing it also. Hang on one second as I do my best to turn this on. Okay, here it comes. Oh, no, it's not. Actually, Jamie, do you think you can do it? I'm having my screen is blocked from doing it for some reason.
I don't actually have my device here handy to achieve that.
Okay, I'm not going to share. So if I'm going to try to send it to Todd, who is engineering this.
There you go.
While in the meantime,
I can say something about this version actually that you're going to play, which Andrew, you'll find interesting too, which is the version I sent to Rabbi Jacobs just now is from 1983. I believe they were calling that the Refuge of the Roads tour, and that was sort of with more of her sort of jazz fusion musicians. And she again sort of develops the song and adds a new section into it. Each time at the end of the verse, there's maybe 8 or 10 extra bars of music. So she's still developing that tune even 15 years after, 10 years after the version that you were referencing before. It's wild.
Amazing.
Wow. Okay. So actually my colleague Elliot is going to try to play it.
Great.
Elliot, I just sent it to you. If you can do it, that's great.
I've never seen this. I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay. Hang on a second. Elliot, give me some kind of signal if you're doing it.
1 second.
Okay. Here we go. I got to get that technology straightened out.
You're doing great, Rabbi.
Thanks. Thank you.
Here we go.
Okay. Thank you. Just like a minute.
I slept last night in a good hotel. I went shopping today for jewels. Wind rushed around in a dirty town, and the children let out from the school. I was standing on a noisy corner, waiting for the walking green. Across the street he stood, and he played real good on his clarinet for free. Playing like a fallen angel, playing like a rising star.
That's
Okay.
the section right there.
Yeah. So,
Great. That was great.
yeah, I mean, you can
Incredible.
hear her exactly as Jamie was laying out in terms of her chord structure, and that voice is just, I don't even know how to describe it. There's just this haunting quality to it. There's a lot of emotion packed into each phrase. And it's just different from everybody else. I don't know even how to articulate it well, but let's hear Jamie's version, and we'll talk about it a little more on the other side. So Real Good for Free, Jamie Saft version. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I've been listening to you play Joni songs for 3 decades, that means.
Incredible.
And I think the first one was Little Green, if I remember.
Could
Yeah,
be.
but yeah, that was beautiful. And so just one reflection, and maybe you guys you'll chime in on this also, but Jamie and I went to the same music conservatory, believe it or not. And they had one day brought in, oh, somebody is sharing. Andrew?
Not me.
It says oh, it's Jen Blair. Todd, is there a way of undoing the sharing that's going on? There you go. Okay, no problem. So they brought in this great jazz bassist named Dave Holland, who I'm sure you guys are familiar with. Yeah. And Dave, so he was giving this talk about individuality in music, and somebody brought up the music of Kenny G. And they did it in this very disparaging way, which was common actually in school when at that time. And Dave stopped and he said, he stopped the guy and he's like, you know what? He said, Kenny is not a fake musician. He is playing from his heart. And he said, anybody who plays from their hearts cannot be criticized. Like he's not trying to make money. He's not trying to position himself. That's where the guy's at. He's sharing his soul with you. And as such, he should be praised, right? So this song is about this dude on the street, and and he's not going to be recognized by anybody. The question is, like, is there a value in that music still if nobody is going to hear it? Do you have to be recognized to be a great artist? That's my question.
So basically, if a tree falls in the forest.
Yeah, George Barkley's take on it.
I spend my whole life answering that question. That's literally what I deal with every day, day in, day out with artists. I mean, that's the question. I mean, right? The art is it music business or the music or the business of music, right? I mean, which comes first? I mean, that's sort of the question you're asking in a way. I mean, if typically the artists I typically work with, and there's a range, but typically the artists I like to work with are the ones that want their music heard by the maximum number of people. That being said, I think there's something to be said. I think there's something about an artist that isn't willing to necessarily water down their music or put a filter on their artistic vision. So I think it's finding that balance, as I said earlier, finding the balance between an artist that has an uncompromising artistic vision, right, an uncompromising musical vision, and yet is willing within the confines of their artistic vision to do something that'll allow it to spread to the maximum number of people. But that's a delicate dance. I mean, I would say we fail most of the time. I mean, for every Captain Beefheart and Sun Ra and you go on and on and on. There's thousands of others that are only playing in their garages, and probably the best music ever made is the one you'll never hear. So that's my take.
Okay, Jamie, you agree, as a working musician, you agree with that, or what do you think?
This question actually makes me think about what Joni might say to this. And Joni said and always says in almost every interview she gives, and she gives a lot of interviews over her career, that she thought of herself as a painter first and a musician second. And so it's actually, I think she is still artistically satisfied even though she's not putting out music. Because she's home painting and she finds another avenue to you know, to work on what she's working on artistically. But Joni certainly was always extremely critical of the music business. So many of her tunes are critical of the business of music, and you know, she would definitely say it's about the work first, and
Yeah.
and primarily.
Okay, I agree. You know, and there are so many great musicians, and I'll just say one more thing about this, which is I once went to see Cedar Walton at the Village Vanguard. You know, I didn't buy tickets in advance, was able to just show up at the door and get seats right behind the piano. And I was watching the guy, and I was thinking, this man should be playing to a stadium of 25,000 people, and here he is at this tiny club. You know, who knows what he's even getting paid. And so there is obviously no connection between the magnificence of an artist and the accolades that they get for doing their art. And that, to me, what this song is about. But I wanted to just tie it into the holiday. You know, this is a holiday about Shimon Bar Yochai and his output, right? And yes, he is the author of the Zohar. But did you know that he lived in a cave basically with his son for 13 years, and that was his only students, right? The great Rabbi Akiva, who we referenced at the beginning, whose students we are commemorating today, he had an academy of 24,000 people. He lost all of those except for 5. Wow. And those 5 people, can you imagine, like, that's a failure. You're a failure if you got 1 student or 5 students when you're on that level, right? But no, because through those 5 students, the entirety of the oral Torah, the Talmud as we know it, got passed on. Those 5 people were momentous. They changed the world. And so therefore you never know, you know, what your tune is going to accomplish in this world, whether you're playing it on the street for the passersby, whether you get it recorded, whether you don't, whether someone discovers you after you're gone from this world. You don't know how it's going to affect someone and what that effect is going to be on the world. And the last thing I thought about this, because we're almost unfortunately out of time, is, you know, they say about a flower has no need to be recognized. It doesn't need to show you itself. It's just there, right? And Joni often paints flowers in like her album covers, and it just made me think that it's a perfect representation of who she is. She's just out there. She's beautiful for those who come by and check it out, you know, and God willing, more people should, because her whole canon is off the charts in terms of quality and how much it moves people. So that is our presentation on Kabbalah, Lag BaOmer, Joni Mitchell. As always, it's been an incredible honor and pleasure to bring this to you with Jamie and Andrew. And we'll look for you next time. There's a program we're doing at Aish New York on Thursday night. If anyone has seen the film Unorthodox, we have an amazing panel getting together to discuss and explore that movie. If you're interested, it's on the same Zoom channel, aish.com/Zoom. Check that out. And please watch aishnewyork.com for upcoming events and programs. Thank you so much for coming out and listening. And thank you guys very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a great night.
Be well.
Bye.